Hi everyone, you're watching the Skywatch Media news channel, and here's what's happening for the second week of October 2018. There are two stories gathering a great deal of attention at this time. Both of them involve the state of Florida. Hurricane Michael is pushing through the Gulf of Mexico and is expected to be a major storm threatening the Florida Panhandle by midweek. The newly formed Gulf storm is forecast to be life-threatening and extremely dangerous, similar in stature and in strength to Hurricane Florence, which ravaged the Carolinas in September, resulting in historical and unprecedented flooding and responsible for the deaths of dozens of people. A state of emergency has already been declared for 26 counties across the Florida Panhandle and the Big Bend coastal regions of northern Florida. People living in these areas should have an emergency preparedness plan. It is common knowledge that anyone who lives in Florida or along the Gulf Coast should be aware that the path of a storm similar to Michael can change at any moment. And this is why it is so important to be vigilant and to get prepared, because these storms are becoming more dangerous and more deadly over time, and they must be taken seriously now and in our future. Hurricane Michael is a short-term concern for Florida, with the potential for long-term consequences for those who live in its path. But there is another problem that is plaguing Florida, with potentially devastating consequences for both the environment and the economy, as well as the future of coastal regions across the state. The waters surrounding Florida are turning red. A severe outbreak of the red tide is threatening both the Gulf and the Atlantic coast. The outbreak of toxic algae is so consuming that Florida's most famous beaches are closed, and they are void of enthusiastic beachgoers. Therefore, tourism has taken a major dive. The problem is so bad that lifeguards are forced to wear respiratory masks for their own safety. For these reasons, a red tide state of emergency has been declared for the Sunshine State. Red tide is an ongoing threat to the environment. It can cause serious breathing problems in humans. It's been blamed for tons of dead fish and sea mammals on miles of beaches along the Gulf Coast. At least 6 Palm Beach County beaches have been closed since the weekend of October 6th because of the outbreak of the toxic algae. Having been a former resident of Florida's Gulf Coast, I can attest to the seriousness of this environmental concern. It can be devastating to our environment and to sea life if it is allowed to continue unabated. State officials say a red tide bloom that began in the fall of 2017 now stretches along roughly 135 miles of Florida's southwest coast, affecting businesses, tourism, and vacationers. All along Florida's Gulf Coast, crews of county jail inmates are cleaning up piles of dead fish that were killed by the red tide bloom. Along the mid-coast of Florida, Pinellas County is partnering with the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration to issue out a first-of-the-kind air quality forecast to keep residents and visitors safe during red tide. The strength of the fast-moving currents that circulate from the Gulf into the Florida Straits and then up along Florida's Atlantic coast are a reason why the NOAA is issuing air quality advisories. This year has been an anomalous year for red tide. The circulation of the current is relatively constant. It forms the core of the Gulf Stream, and it is well known. It can meander widely, bringing red tide closer to shore quickly, or holding it out at great length for long periods of time at sea. If the Florida current meanders toward the coast, that could amplify an already bad situation into a worst-case scenario. The king tides expected in South Florida in October and November could potentially worsen the outbreak if large amounts of the algae continue flowing closer to the shoreline. So far, little has been done to curtail the outbreak of toxins, and so the algae continues to spread across the Gulf Stream and up along the Atlantic coastline, where it poses a multitude of problems for the coastal environment and for millions of people living along the coast. For the first time on record, there are simultaneous Category 5 storms that are churning in the Pacific Ocean. In the Northeast Pacific, there is Super Typhoon Kong-rey, which pummeled South Korea. And in the Northwest Pacific, there is Hurricane Walaka. In total, this now brings the number of Category 5 storms to 8 for the year 2018, with the majority of superstorms forming in the Western Pacific. The most Category 5 storms since global satellite records began was in the year 1997, when 12 Category 5 storms developed. Simultaneous Category 5 storms are very rare, and this is the first time in the historical record that Category 5s have existed simultaneously in the Northwest Pacific and in the Northeast Pacific. This is another indication that our atmosphere is changing drastically as our climate becomes more extreme and more unpredictable. Hurricane Florence inundated North Carolina with 6 months' worth of rain last month, all of it happening within a matter of hours. In Cumberland County, the Cape Fear River rose 40 feet within 48 hours, swamping Fayetteville with the worst flooding dating back more than 70 years. The disaster wrought by Florence was devastating, but as the victims began coming back to begin the cleanup of their waterlogged homes, a plague began to descend upon them. In the aftermath of the storm, clouds of monstrous hyper-aggressive mosquitoes invaded the recently flooded areas. There are now 27 counties in North Carolina that are in the midst of what is being called a mega-mosquito outbreak. The species of mosquito, known as gallinippers, are the size of nickels, and their presence has prompted the governor of North Carolina to appropriate millions of dollars to combat the invading swarms. Concerned that their presence will hamper cleanup efforts, Cumberland County has set out pesticide spray trucks, and they have scheduled aerial bombardment spraying in an effort to alleviate the mosquito invasion. The supersized mosquitoes are extremely aggressive, quickly falling on their prey both in daylight and in the evening, delivering a fearsome bite. The mouth of the gallinipper is designed for larger prey. It is a rare species of mosquito that can actually pierce the hide of cattle. Its penetration is so deep that it can set off nerve cells in the epidermis, which is designed to alert the body of a serious wound, much like the penetration of a knife. The bite of the gallinipper produces intense pain to the skin if it is compromised, which means that the body could be in big trouble. Therefore, the invasion of this species is a serious concern for the safety and the health of flood victims in North Carolina. As climate change continues to worsen, the outbreak of pestilence and disease will become a major concern across the globe, leading to a new host of epidemics and even pandemics in areas susceptible to the formation of viruses and disease-ridden insects, such as the mega-mosquito. Here is the latest update from the National Weather Service with respect to Hurricane Michael. It is forecast to strike the Florida Panhandle as a Category 3 or greater intensity storm, driving life-threatening storm surge flooding and destructive winds. Michael will also spread heavy rain and strong winds to other parts of the southeastern United States after it moves inland. Michael could develop into a potentially catastrophic event for the northeastern Gulf Coast, this according to the National Weather Service office in Tallahassee, Florida. Michael could be the strongest hurricane to make landfall along the stretch of Florida's Panhandle Gulf Coast in the past 13 years. Michael is currently centered about 335 miles south of Panama City, Florida, and it is moving north. It is expected to make landfall by midday on October the 10th. If you have not made disaster preparedness plans, you are urged to do so immediately. As we enter a time of turmoil and great trouble, look towards the sky, that your days may not be rooted in sorrow, but in the peace and tranquility that will return once more. Thanks for watching.